Okay, we're back. What we want to do now is talk about addressing challenging behavior and trauma. When we look at addressing challenging behavior within the classroom, we want to remember that behavior is saying something, and you've got to look at what is that behavior saying. So you've got to think about what factors or effects are impressed on the behavior of the child. So when you're looking at what the behavior is saying, remember it's a form of communication. So is it because the child is having issues with their communication skills? Is it because they have trouble with emotional regulation? Is it because they're not meeting developmental milestones? Is it an environmental factor? Is it based on their social skills? Are they seeking attention? There are usually two basic reasons for addressing, for challenging behavior. It's something the children want, or it's something they don't want. A lot of times we get confused when a child is behaviorally challenging, and we think it's all about what they want, but sometimes it's not, especially when you're looking at children with sensory issues. It's about not wanting to feel a certain way. And so they behave in a negative way. We as educators have to really change our view on challenging behaviors so that we learn not to just stop that behavior, but to help equip the children with the ability to stop that behavior, or to self-regulate that behavior, or to choose a better behavior. Challenging behaviors continue because they're effective. What you have to do is find a way to make that behavior not effective within your classroom. Usually it's because the children lack the skills for negotiation, for problem solving, for self-regulation. And so it is your job as an educator to teach those particular skills so that you can focus on developing skills that need to be developed so that the child can self-regulate. And so that behavior will stop. Helping children learn positive, effective ways to express themselves, communicate their needs, regulate their feelings and actions, and just deal with life is truly self-regulation. And as adults, we need to self-regulate. Teaching children in preschool to self-regulate will prevent a lot of the challenges that we as adults face. When you see a challenging behavior, you have to ask yourself, what is the antecedent? What happened right before? What is the behavior? What does it look like? What is a measurable term, but also being objective and not subjective. And then what consequence, what happens after the behavior? And then even though it's not listed in this text on page 50, you want to look at what can you do to help equip the child with the skills to best overcome this particular behavior. There's a school in Charlotte that has a checklist for this. And we talked last time about making sure that you documented these types of things for the parents and to help them better understand that you've done what you needed to do, hear what was going on to show a better picture. It's a checkbox. It's not anything you have to write. And I am going to get a copy of that and send it through the message board so that you guys can see it, because that shows changing challenging behavior, how to go about it, and also how to equip the parents with the verbiage to say, this is what kind of behaviors my children are having. When you have a child that has consistent behaviors, especially in the school system setting, you're going to look at doing a functional behavior assessment, and that's an FBA. And that's a document where you go in and you identify and understand the reason for behavior. So you identify the behavior, you identify what the potential reason is for the behavior. And then as you move forward, you then identify an intervention plan or a BIP, a behavior intervention plan. So what you're doing with the document that I just mentioned is that you are identifying and describing the behavior in an observable, measurable term. Then you're collecting data. What happened before? What time was it? Where was the child at? Who was involved? And then you're making a hypothesis on what it could be that the child was trying to do, whether it was, frustration or power or to get what they wanted. And once all of that is done, then you develop and implement a behavior modification plan. So you talk about what you do in the classroom, and then you move forward on that. So in our text, it talks a little bit about a BIP, and it talks about different things that you can do after you've gathered that information. But always remember that if the behaviors are not diminishing, that you have to step back and look for a new path to take. And that is just really important, that you reevaluate your practice on a regular basis to make sure that you're meeting the specific needs of the children. As we move on, we want to talk about preventing challenging behavior. Now, one of the ways that I talked about preventing challenging behavior was establishing routines, establishing predictable schedules, making sure that the materials are developmentally appropriate, reducing the number of transitions in a day, or having transition supports to help you within the transitions. I will also send you a really cute cleanup song that made cleanup, in an observation that I did last semester, made cleanup so fun for the children, and they all bought into it, and it wasn't a negative thing. It was an enjoyable, fun thing to watch and to participate in. You also want to remember that there is power in the peers, like we spoke about with my grandchildren who went to the zoo, with my grandson who is on the spectrum. The power, the model that they set, the supports that they provided can happen within your classroom if you set it up, if you choose intentional buddies, if you make sure your routines are consistent, if you have a good attitude. All of those things are going to be power within your classroom. You want to make sure that you're teaching social and emotional skills. Don't stop. We don't do that. You're not following the rules are not ways to teach guidance or behavior management or equip children with ability to self-regulate. Teaching social and emotional skills means that you talk about taking turns. You talk about sharing. You talk about other social skills that are positive. When a child is unhappy, you talk about that, and you talk about different ways that we can make that child feel better. Let it be an everyday thing, not something that you're stopping and doing, but that it's part of your everyday practice. You teach children to problem solve. So you want that ball? Oh, I can see I would want that ball too. But Johnny has that ball. So what do you think we need to do? Don't tell the children what to do. Let the children walk through the process with you and learn to negotiate when sharing materials. Come up with just a few classroom rules. I don't like the word rules. I like big ideas. So in my classrooms, we kept our friends safe, we kept our stuff safe, we kept ourselves safe, and we respected ourselves and others. And every crime that's ever been committed in the world falls into one of those big ideas. So as you look at that, if we learn how to do those things, self, stuff, friends, and respect ourselves and others, there is no behavior issues. So when a child is doing something that they shouldn't be doing, like climbing up on a table, you're going to say, hey, Xavier, are you keeping yourself safe? And he could say no or yes. And then you could talk about how that wasn't safe. Or, hey, Xavier, are you keeping the table safe? Because you're pretty heavy and that table may break if you stand on it. It's teaching the children to think beyond where they're at, to not go with just their impulses, to actually have accountability and responsibility within their environment. Teaching self-regulation is something that you have to do from the very word go. And as you think about teaching self-regulation, you need to think about things like mindfulness activities within your classroom on a regular basis, teaching your children how to breathe, emotional check-ins. Ooh, it looks like you're upset. What are you feeling right now? Calm down area, journaling, self-reflection, negotiation, practice wait times, review daily practices and routines. There are things like calming activities where you can give yourself a hug or fire hands or hand over your heart and breathe. Shoulder shrugs when you're really frustrated, or counting. One of the things that I do with some of my guys is we count fingers. So we do this. Now, your little ones can't necessarily do that, but your older children can. When they're focusing on this, they can't really focus on smacking somebody. So these are things that you want to think about as you move forward in ensuring that your classroom is addressing those challenging behaviors. Okay, trauma. Trauma is a big thing. And as we look at trauma, what I want you guys to do is to really look at how trauma affects children and what trauma-informed care is. So we're going to move here and talk just a little bit about trauma-informed care. Children are infiltrated with trauma today. There's all kinds of things that happen. If you've looked at the ACEs studies, you see that, children watch their parents fight. Some children are homeless. Some children, have all different kinds of things that are occurring in their lives that you may not be privy to. So you want to make sure that you're meeting the needs of the children within your classroom and you're becoming trauma sensitive. So some of the different ways that trauma experiences affect young children is physical, sexual, psychological, or emotional abuse, witnessing domestic violence, witnessing community violence, experiencing natural disaster, traumatic grief, medical injury or illness, experiencing a break-in or robbery, or just aggression, experiencing chronic homelessness, and then military stressors like deployment. So as you look at stressors, I want you really quickly just to watch trauma as an introduction.
So trauma has a huge variety of definitions depending on where you look and what you look up. We in my work tend to think of trauma as an experience or a set of experiences, a repeated set of experiences that create an elevated stress response. And then over time sensitizes or makes that stress response overreactive. Obviously there are hundreds of definitions of trauma, but really when we talk about trauma here, we're going to be talking about that trauma that's brought on by an event that seems overwhelming to the stress response system, or a series of events such as child abuse, neglect, living in poverty, living with someone who has an untreated mental illness, living with someone who has an untreated substance abuse disorder, those types of issues that can overwhelm that stress response. Trauma-informed care, again, can have hundreds of definitions of what we think about. And some people want to get very specific about what it means, and some people like to take a much more broad approach to that. I think overwhelmingly, as I've done my research, has been to look at it and say, there are tenets that are true whether you look at it specifically or whether you look at it at a broad level. And so tenets that we tend to think about in trauma-informed care is a sensitivity and a recognition that behavior is not intended to be a personal attack. The behavior that we see, that we find challenging, really is a response to that stress and a response to the impact that overwhelming stress has had on the neural pathways in the brain. And so when we think about trauma-informed care, first thinking about how do we as professionals, as adults, as parents, as caregivers, all provide an environment of safety, emotionally, physically, but also an environment where people are allowed to and encouraged to explore in the context of a safe, loving, nurturing relationship, a safe environment, and then to have the relationships and the connectedness to be able to handle the overwhelming emotions that come when we explore the world. I still have those overwhelming emotions, right? And so for kids, especially when they've had to cope with and deal with adversity in their life that has kind of created this reactive and oversensitive stress response, they see the world as threatening all the time. And that's a natural response in the brain to respond to something that's big and bad and scary. When that happens all the time, the stress response gets hyperactive and then sees everything in the world as threat. And so we will behave out of that sense of threat. So to respond in a trauma-informed care way is to recognize that behavior as that response to stress, and then to create in that moment care and concern, connectedness, respect, and an ability to walk side by side with somebody to help them navigate those emotions, help them regulate their brain back to a place where it can take an input accurately rather than that misperception of threat.
Wonderful. So I encourage you to really dig into that portion of this coming week's study and learn more about trauma and how you can be a trauma-sensitive environment and how you can support the children that are in your care, not only children with exceptionalities, but every child who is differently abled, who has different aspects of their life that may affect their behaviors, their interactions, and their being a successful part of your classroom community. Thank you so much. I look forward to all the fun learning that you're going to be doing in the next couple of weeks. Again, spring break is coming up, so we are not meeting in 2 weeks. We will actually meet in 3 weeks, but we're going to be covering a lot of different specific disabilities or exceptionalities and ways that we can implement and alter our environment to best meet the needs of not just gaining awareness, but having tangible strategies that we can use within the classroom. Thank you again. If you need anything, just email me. If you need to talk with me directly, we'll make an appointment. And I look forward to seeing you in 3 weeks.